Hello and welcome. Here's what's happening right now. American senators visit the Prime Minister.
I think it was very good that they came up, bipartisan group, exceptional experience.
The joint effort to ease Canada-U.S. tensions.
It's extremely nerve-wracking. There's just so much panic, frustration.
Canadians caught in the crosshairs of a battle between Trump and Harvard.
We can predict the level of activity. We can't necessarily predict exactly where they're going to go.
Plus, tracking the strong storms taking aim at Atlantic Canada.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
In the midst of the most turbulent time in Canada-U.S. relations in recent memory, a delegation of United States senators arrived in Ottawa to meet with the Prime Minister. 4 Democrats and 1 Republican joined Mark Carney and his team as Trump's tariffs loom large. CTV's Jeremy Sharon is covering the visit for us. Now, Jeremy, what are Canadian officials saying about today's event?
Well, Heather, by all accounts, these were positive meetings, constructive meetings. As you've touched on, this group of senators met with Prime Minister Mark Carney. They met with Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand. They met with Industry Minister Melanie Joly, as well as Defense Minister David McGuinty. The group spending the morning in meetings here on Parliament Hill. We know that Donald Trump's trade war, tariffs were a focus. Defense priorities between the two countries were certainly part of the discussion. The Canadian side hasn't offered up a ton of detail when it comes to takeaways from those meetings, just that they were good meetings, constructive meetings, and that they're continuing to work on that relationship. We are expecting at some point a statement from the Prime Minister's office on how today's meetings went, but we did speak with the Prime Minister on his way out of those meetings earlier today. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say.
We discussed security and economic issues. I think it's very important. It was both important substantively and symbolically. I think it was very good that they came up, bipartisan group, exceptional experience.
Anything on tariffs?
So, Jeremy, there's the response from the Prime Minister. What about U.S. senators? What did they say at their press conference?
Well, we heard more from U.S. senators today. They organized this visit, Heather, and what we heard from them was that this was a trip that had a clear focus, looking on bolstering the relationship between the two countries, but certainly acknowledging that it is a relationship that is strained at the moment. We heard from several senators today who talked about cracks in the relationship, trying to mend those cracks in the relationship. There was a lot of talk about the tariffs, a lot of talk about a potential new trade agreement between the two countries, and we know that among those senators, 4 of them were Democrats. 1 was a Republican. That Republican was Senator Kevin Cramer from North Dakota, who acknowledged that there is a strained relationship, but he feels as though the ties between the two countries, the long ties between the two countries, are ties that cannot be broken. Here's a little more from Senator Cramer earlier today.
Donald Trump was a transformational president. You have here a transformational Prime Minister. 2 business guys. They know business. They know economics. They know how to work a deal. And they had an encouraging first meeting. We want to come and continue that momentum.
The group certainly appeared to be impressed by Mark Carney. That's something we heard from them today, and that they were encouraged. The big question, Heather, is how that message gets across to President Donald Trump and what kind of an impact it could have on a future new trade relationship between the two countries.
All right, CTV's Jeremy Sharon reporting tonight from Ottawa. A Newfoundland riding has flipped to the Conservatives after a recount. Conservative Jonathan Rowe has won the federal riding of Terra Nova, the Peninsulas, after a judicial recount, beating the Liberal candidate by just 12 votes. This brings the Liberal seat count back to 169, which is 3 seats shy of a majority. A sigh of relief today for those who rely on daily mail service, with postal workers still on the job. However, Canada Post is warning of possible delays as employees are now refusing to work overtime. CTV's Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Boschman is at a postal office for us this evening. Geneviève, what is the impact of the job action?
Yeah, Heather, the post office is up and running here, but uncertainty as to delivery dates has some customers looking for other options. Mail is still moving, delivery trucks hitting the road. But business has slowed, says Canada Post.
We're operating on fumes. Canadian customers and everybody is avoiding the post office because they don't want their items to be trapped. So our volumes are down significantly.
An all-out strike was averted last night, but the union issued a countrywide ban on overtime for its 55,000 members, so postal workers are sticking to regular hours. And more job action could come. The union is reviewing an offer management put on the table Wednesday.
We are evaluating the 700-page detailed offer that Canada Post has given us. We were at the bargaining table yesterday to discuss certain aspects of it, and we're hoping that we'll have a good collective agreement that would be ratified by our members.
Among sticking points, the percentage of a salary increase, weekend deliveries, and part-time workers. Canada Post says this dispute comes at a critical time as the service deals with mounting losses. Now, foundations like those for cancer research are urging donors to stick to online giving, warning against checks stuck in the mail. And the uncertainty surrounding the threat of another strike and job actions are driving business owners to other options, even though that comes at a cost.
Even things like surge pricing start to happen among those couriers. So not only is it the regular cost, but now they're charging an extra fee because now they have more load than they normally did.
And for some in rural areas, Canada Post, now operating through job action, is the only game in town. And so that letter or that package could now take longer to get to customers. Heather.
CTV's Jean Bushman in Montreal. The future of hundreds of Canadian students at Harvard is uncertain after Donald Trump banned international students from attending the school. Harvard today filed a lawsuit challenging the order. CTV's Heather Wright on the ongoing battle between the elite American school and the Trump administration.
Nearly 7,000 international students now find themselves in the crosshairs of the Trump administration's ongoing battle with Harvard University.
It's extremely nerve-wracking. There's just so much panic, frustration.
Canadian economics student Thomas Mate is among those worried about the Trump administration's decision yesterday to block international students from attending Harvard.
I think just students in my position now have no other choice but to remain hopeful. So much of our lives are tied up at Harvard, so much of our ongoing work and our tuition as well. But there's just so much at stake for all of us.
Today, a judge issued a temporary restraining order against the federal government after Harvard filed a lawsuit accusing the Trump administration of a, quote, campaign of retribution against the university. The White House has been locked in a fierce battle with Harvard, accusing them of not doing enough to combat anti-Semitism on campus, criticism that stems in part from campus protests last year over the war in Gaza. Today, the president said the order might go beyond Harvard to other schools.
Well, we're taking a look at a lot of things.
Harvard says these executive orders are all about control. In its lawsuit, Harvard says the Trump administration is exerting clear retaliation for Harvard exercising its First Amendment rights to control Harvard's governance, curriculum, and the ideology of its faculty and students.
It's clearly blackmail. It's a financial blackmail.
Anna Triandafilidou is a migration researcher at Toronto Metropolitan University and says while colleges and universities in both Canada and the U.S. can do better when it comes to fighting racism and anti-Semitism, she says schools must also stand up for their independence.
What we're talking about here is independence. Is recognizing the role and the right of higher education and universities to be places of critical thinking.
Roughly 750 Canadian students attend Harvard and are caught up in this fight. Among them, the Prime Minister's daughter. Heather.
CTV's Heather Wright. Thank you. Donald Trump is talking about tariffs again, this time targeting Apple and other smartphone makers, saying he already warned CEO Tim Cook.
I had an understanding with him that he wouldn't be doing this. He said he's going to India to build plants. I said, that's okay to go to India, but you're not going to sell into here without tariffs. And that's the way it is.
Trump says Apple would face a 25% tariff unless it moves production to the U.S. Analysts have been skeptical about how quickly Apple could shift its manufacturing and say iPhones made in the U.S. would be more expensive. Trump is also targeting the EU, posting our discussions with them are going nowhere. Therefore, I am recommending a straight 50% tariff starting on June the 1st. Members of the EU called the threat a step in ongoing talks. Russia and Ukraine say they have begun the largest prisoner swap since the war started. Both countries freed 390 prisoners each, with a promise for more exchanges in the coming days. The agreement to release 1,000 people from each side was the only concrete step that came out of the first ever direct talks last week. 2025 is lining up to be a busier than normal hurricane season, according to forecasters both in the U.S. and Canada. Hurricane season runs from June 1st to the end of November. CTV's Paul Hollingsworth joins us from Halifax. Paul, what should people expect this year?
Heather, Canadians and especially people living in this region should brace for what could be a dangerous hurricane season. Forecasting hurricanes is a mix of bracing for the worst and hoping for the best.
Although we can predict the level of activity, we can't necessarily predict exactly where they're going to go.
This year's hurricane forecast offers a frightening scenario with more storms than normal. But according to Environment Canada, it's impossible to know how many storms will actually make landfall.
So sometimes you can have a very active season, but the storm track kind of keeps most of the storms offshore and you have lower impacts.
In the U.S., the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration also predicted a busy Atlantic hurricane season. Recent cuts to NOAA by the Trump administration have put a strain on the Weather Service, making it difficult for experts to track hurricanes and major storms.
Having a really accurate forecast goes a long way to keeping people safe, making sure that the people in the greatest threat area are able to take actions to protect their lives and property.
Canadian forecasters are predicting an above normal probability for hurricanes and major storms, with 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 5 major Category 3 hurricanes.
We can count on typically 2 to 4 hurricanes or tropical storms that will enter our response zone on any given year. Not all of those will have impacts on land.
Category 3 to Category 5 hurricanes are the most intense and dangerous hurricanes. There's been an increase in these type of hurricanes over the past 40 years, which adds to the urgency for Canadians to be prepared. Heather.
Paul Hollingsworth along the Halifax waterfront. Coming up.
Whether it was sadness, whether it was grief, it was everything all combined.
A veteran's daughter and the search for her father's missing remains. Now to a mystery in Manitoba, where a woman from the UK thought she had located her father's lost remains. But when cemetery workers dug in, they came up empty. CTV's Alex Karpa is in Winnipeg with a look at how this happened. Alex.
Heather, it's quite the baffling situation. I'm just outside the Green Acres Cemetery, where Elizabeth Patrick found the remains of her father, but only to find out they're still missing. Sergeant Gordon Alexander Patrick was a Royal Air Force pilot and was buried here in Winnipeg in 1973. According to records obtained by his daughter, Elizabeth wants her father's remains moved to Burlington, Ontario in the Field of Honor to be buried next to her son, who was also in the military. She started the process to get her father's remains disinterred a year ago, and within 6 months it was approved. It took place earlier this week here at the cemetery, but when they dug up the grave, it was completely empty. I spoke to Elizabeth, who lives in England, and she told me she is completely distraught with what occurred.
Whether it was shock, whether it was sadness, whether it was grief, it was everything all combined. It just was, and it was totally unexpected. So when you're met with something that's unexpected like that, you don't react until after the fact.
Elizabeth says she didn't know her father. Her parents divorced when she was very young in England, and he moved to Canada in 1956. From records she was able to obtain, she knows he lived in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and ended up here in Manitoba before his death in 1973. She's been looking for her father for the past 10 years and is now working with the cemetery on what to do next. Heather?
All right, Alex, thank you. Doctors in Canada and around the world are expressing concern about a practice being touted on social media as a way to eliminate snoring and sleep apnea. But as CTV's Pauline Chan tells us, it could actually be harmful.
Dr. Brian Rotenberg first noticed postings on TikTok and Instagram about mouth taping about 5 years ago, but he says 2 years ago its popularity exploded.
In all honesty, Pauline, I was very surprised that this is everywhere. And the people who are recommending this have large numbers of subscribers and followers, like thousands, tens of thousands.
So he and his colleagues began examining good quality medical studies from around the world to see if there is any real benefit to mouth tape for people who snore or who have sleep apnea. He even tried it himself.
So good quality evidence does not show any benefit at all from mouth taping. 20% does show some benefit, but we have to get a little bit nuanced here, that the benefit is likely statistical and not clinical.
He says sleep apnea is experienced by about 9% of the male population and 3 to 6% of females.
So sleep apnea is a disorder caused by collapsing of our throat when we're breathing at night. Tongue, palate, tonsils, all those things are blocking your airway. And if you're taping your mouth because your nose is blocked, so you've got throat closure, not a good nasal airway, and now you've blocked your mouth, this doesn't make any sense to do at all. And there's actually a real risk of harm with that.
The harm is that the body gets a reduced amount of oxygen at night, leading to fatigue, lack of deep sleep, and sometimes even headaches.
And then the issue is that over time, untreated apnea is associated with increased risk of heart attack, stroke, dementia, depression, and even higher rates of car accidents.
If you suffer from sleep apnea or snoring, there are various treatments, but Dr. Rotenberg says the first step is to get assessed by a proper health professional instead of resorting to unscientific methods. Pauline Chan, CTV News.
A few months after canceling a show in Toronto citing a medical issue, singer Billy Joel has now canceled all of his upcoming tour dates and revealed new details about his condition.
His only show in Canada in 2025. Billy Joel.
In a message on his website, Joel says he has been diagnosed with a brain disorder that causes problems with hearing, vision, and balance, and it's been made worse by recent performances. He was scheduled to return to Toronto next March, which would have been the tour's only scheduled Canadian stop. Coming up after the break.
It feels like a really, really elaborate practical joke.
Which Canadian author received a coveted Irish honor? An author from Newfoundland has won a prestigious international prize. Michael Crummy was given the Dublin Literary Award. CTV's Sarah Plowman caught up with the winning writer who's still in Ireland.
Newfoundland author Michael Crummy says he's still in shock he won the prestigious Dublin Literary Award.
It feels like a really, really elaborate practical joke. And I'm expecting at any moment someone to just say, you fell for it.
His novel, The Adversary, took home the prize worth more than $156,000. The novel takes readers to the harsh realities of 19th century Newfoundland, where two siblings own competing trading companies. It's a companion to a previous novel, The Innocents, but instead of a relationship built on love, this one is driven by greed and hatred.
It's about a brother and sister who actively despise one another. So instead of a strange Adam and Eve story in The Innocents, this is a Cain and Abel story, which I think feels to me in many ways like the world we're living in right now.
Born in Buckins, a small mining town in central Newfoundland, Crummy says it's been a long, strange trip to this stage.
But if I had to name a beginning to that journey, it would be Saturday morning visits to the Buckins Public Library,
where he fell in love with stories. And today there's a nook called Crummy's Corner. The nominations for this prize come from libraries around the world. Staff at Newfoundland and Labrador public libraries are thrilled their pick won.
It's been a high the last 24, almost 48 hours since we've received the news.
The Adversary was picked out of 71 entries from 34 different countries. As for what the author might do with his prize money,
I haven't decided. I mean, some things that I'd never be able to do, like give some money to our daughters. My mother has a travel fund, so I'm going to make a donation to that. And I've got a surprise for my wife coming up for her birthday.
Crummy is the third Canadian author to be awarded this prize and notes it'll also give him more time to write. Heather.
Sarah, thank you. Now to a supersized near miss after a case of being asleep at the helm. This cargo ship ran aground in Norway, crashing into a garden just meters from a home. 16 crew were on board, but no one was hurt. The watch officer, who has admitted to falling asleep, has been charged with negligent navigation. After the break, a controversial find, the deep sea discovery and the debate that surfaced along with it. A long-lost piece of Canadian naval history has been recovered from the bottom of the English Channel. However, not everyone is celebrating. CTV's John Valley-Rao explains.
Corvettes. Among the Canadian Navy ships lost during the Second World War was HMCS Trentonian, torpedoed by a German U-boat in 1945 off the coast of England. 80 years later, footage taken by UK diver and YouTuber Dom Robinson shows him searching the wreckage for his third time and making a thrilling discovery.
I didn't really believe it was there until I actually saw it. And then, of course, that was just an amazing feeling.
Robinson had found the prized ship's bell, long believed to still be in the decaying debris. Almost 70 meters down, he says it took 2 hours to retrieve.
My God, it was freaking amazing.
Robinson later handed it over to members of the Canadian Navy. He says they thanked him. But some, like Navy historian Roger Latwiller, were not impressed.
Those are a war grave just the same as any plot on land.
5 sailors went down with the Trentonian, and Latwiller says over the years, divers have been taking items from their final resting place, which some think should be safeguarded like a battlefield cemetery.
Anything of value has been coming off the ship.
Robinson says the wreckage is disintegrating and says the bell is better off on the surface.
I think it's really important that the bell of the Trentonian is not on the ocean floor. Nobody else will see it down there other than the very small number of divers like me. It's much better that it's in a museum setting.
What Robinson did wasn't illegal, but there has been a push to get Canadian Navy shipwrecks protected, as is the case for sunken British warships around the UK. The Canadian Navy says the acceptance of the bell doesn't imply that it approves or encourages the removal of items from war graves, which it considers this to be.
Not often that this happens.
As for Robinson, he says he's willing to put the bell back if what he did was wrong. The Navy plans to display it in a Halifax museum. John Valley-Rao, CTV News.
That is our newscast for this Friday. Thank you for watching. I will be back tonight with CTV National News at 11. I hope you can join us. I'm Heather Butts. Your local CTV News starts right now.